The Bible records many wars fought on earth, conflicts between nations, kingdoms rising and falling, battles that shaped human history. Yet there is a far older, deeper, and more decisive conflict than any war between men. It did not take place on earth, it did not involve human armies, and it is rarely explained in detail. Scripture speaks of it only in fragments, as if revealing just enough to be understood, but never fully seen. This conflict is the war in heaven, a real spiritual battle whose consequences reach all of humanity.
The clearest description of this war appears in Revelation chapter 12. John describes a vision unlike anything else in Scripture, using symbolic language to express spiritual realities. He speaks of a great sign appearing in heaven, followed by another sign that is far more terrifying. A great red dragon, enormous in size, with multiple heads and horns, whose tail sweeps a third of the stars from the sky and casts them down to the earth. The biblical text itself removes any uncertainty about the central meaning of this image by stating that the dragon is the ancient serpent, called the devil and Satan, the one who deceives the whole world. This is not myth or empty symbolism, but a spiritual representation of a real and serious reality.
John then states something astonishing in only a few words. There was war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon and his angels fought back. The text gives no description of weapons, strategies, or tactics. It simply declares the fact, as if the existence of the war itself matters more than its mechanics. Heaven, often associated with perfect order and peace, becomes the scene of conflict. Angels fight against angels. Created spiritual beings stand in direct opposition to one another. And despite the power of the dragon and the number of angels who followed him, Scripture is clear that they did not prevail, and that there was no longer any place for them in heaven. This war did not arise without cause. Other passages of Scripture help illuminate its origins. In Isaiah chapter 14 and Ezekiel chapter 28, we find prophetic descriptions that, while addressing earthly kings in their immediate context, are commonly understood in Christian theology to reflect a deeper spiritual reality. These passages speak of a being exalted in beauty and wisdom, created in perfection, who desired to rise beyond his appointed place. The language points to pride, ambition, and rebellion. Scripture does not explicitly name Satan in these passages, but their imagery aligns closely with other biblical descriptions of his fall, which is why this interpretation appears consistently in theological studies and Christian documentaries. The book of Job adds another important element to this picture. In its opening chapter, Satan appears among the sons of God, presenting himself before the Lord. This suggests that at some point he still retained a form of access to the heavenly council. This detail supports the understanding that his fall was not instantaneous at creation, but the result of a rebellion that ultimately led to his complete expulsion, as described in Revelation. The war in heaven, therefore, is not a random event, but the climax of a spiritual revolt against divine authority. Revelation states that the dragon swept a third of the stars of heaven with him. Throughout Scripture, stars are often used symbolically to represent angels. This interpretation is widely accepted in theological scholarship and indicates that a significant number of heavenly beings chose to follow Satan in his rebellion. The conflict was not limited to two opposing figures, but involved vast spiritual forces. Even so, the outcome was absolute. Satan and his angels were cast out of heaven and thrown down to the earth. This moment marks a profound shift in the spiritual landscape of creation. A voice in heaven proclaims joy for the heavens, but announces woe to the earth, because the devil has come down with great wrath, knowing that his time is short. This statement reveals something essential about the nature of the conflict. Satan does not act because he believes he can overthrow God. He acts because he knows his final judgment is already determined. His activity becomes defined by urgency, deception, and opposition to God's work. The Apostle Paul confirms this reality when he writes to the Ephesians that our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against rulers, authorities, and spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. This is not a new concept, but a continuation of what is revealed in Revelation and Daniel. In Daniel chapter 10, the prophet describes an angel who is delayed by a spiritual entity referred to as the Prince of Persia until Michael comes to assist him. This passage offers a rare glimpse into how this spiritual conflict continues to operate behind the scenes of human history. Despite the intensity of this conflict, the Bible is clear that Satan is not equal to God. He is not an opposing force in balance. He is a created being, limited in power, and already defeated. His expulsion from heaven was decisive. Jesus himself affirms this reality in the Gospels when he declares that he saw Satan fall like lightning from heaven. This statement reinforces the certainty of Satan's fall and the finality of his defeat. The war in heaven did not end in stalemate, but in removal. Revelation chapter 20 reveals the final outcome of this conflict. Satan will be bound, judged, and ultimately cast into the lake of fire. This conclusion is presented not as a possibility, but as a certainty. Between his expulsion from heaven and this final judgment lies the period in which humanity lives under the consequences of this spiritual war. This is why Scripture repeatedly calls for vigilance, discernment, and faithfulness. The conflict continues, but its outcome has already been decided. At the center of this victory is not a celestial battle fought with weapons, but the work of Christ. Revelation declares that victory comes through the blood of the Lamb and the word of testimony. This reveals that spiritual warfare reaches its decisive moment not through violence or force, but through redemption and authority. The cross, rather than a battlefield in heaven, becomes the turning point of history.
The war in heaven, which the Bible speaks of only briefly, is not a minor or obscure detail. It is the backdrop of the entire biblical narrative. It explains the presence of evil, the reality of temptation, and the spiritual urgency that runs throughout Scripture. Understanding this war is not meant to produce fear, but clarity. Because according to the Bible itself, the conflict continues, but the victory has already been declared. Heaven is no longer the battlefield, and the final outcome of this war is already determined.